Could India's giant patrol ships reshape Philippine sovereignty? In the vast, restless waters of the West Philippine Sea, where steel hulls loom on the horizon and rival flags test each other's resolve, the Philippines stands at a defining crossroads. This is not a battlefield in the traditional sense. There are no declared wars here, no formal battles. Instead, what unfolds daily is something far more dangerous: a gray zone conflict. A contest of endurance, intimidation, and presence, where coast guards, not navies, are often the first to collide. Where water cannons replace missiles, and maneuvering replaces gunfire. Where sovereignty is challenged not with bombs, but with steel hulls, ramming tactics, and sheer size. And now, a quiet but potentially historic development is emerging. Recent reports from India suggest that the Philippine Coast Guard may be considering the acquisition of India's next-generation offshore patrol vessels, ships over 100 meters long, displacing thousands of tons, and rivaling the size of full-fledged naval warships. Even more striking, these vessels may be built in the Philippines. If confirmed, this would not simply be another procurement deal. It would mark a fundamental shift in how the Philippines defends its maritime sovereignty. Tonight, here on West Pacific Watch, we will break it all down. We will uncover the truth behind the Indian patrol vessel reports, the historical evolution of the Philippine Coast Guard, the strategic logic of ship size in gray zone conflict, the costs, financing, and industrial implications, the role of these ships under Horizon 3, and what all of this means for the Philippines' long struggle against Chinese coercion in the West Philippine Sea. So stay with me until the end. Because in the next few minutes, we are not just talking about ships. We are talking about sovereignty, deterrence, and the future balance of power in our waters. To understand why this possible acquisition matters, we must first understand how far the Philippine Coast Guard has come. For decades, the PCG was a small, under-equipped maritime service, tasked with an enormous responsibility, policing one of the largest exclusive economic zones in Southeast Asia. Its fleet consisted largely of aging cutters transferred from the United States, small patrol craft with limited range, vessels designed more for coastal safety than strategic presence. These ships were brave. Their crews were dedicated, but against the realities of the West Philippine Sea, they were simply outmatched. They lacked endurance for long deployments, space for helicopters and drones, command and control facilities, and crucially, size. That began to change in the early 2010s. The turning point came when Japan stepped in under its Official Development Assistance, ODA, framework. This was not charity, it was strategic alignment. Japan understood that a stronger Philippine Coast Guard meant a rules-based maritime order, fewer flashpoints requiring naval escalation, a stronger front line against coercion in the South China Sea. Through Japanese loans and shipbuilding expertise, the Philippines acquired 10 modern ships, around 44 meters long, designed for patrol, law enforcement, and search and rescue. They were a massive leap forward. But Japan didn't stop there. Then came the Teresa Magbanua-class multi-role response vessels. At 97 meters long, these became the largest ships ever operated by the Philippine Coast Guard, capable of helicopter operations, equipped for disaster response, maritime law enforcement, and extended patrols. For the first time, the PCG had vessels that could remain at sea for weeks, far from Philippine ports. They were a symbol, a declaration that the Coast Guard was no longer a minor maritime service, but a serious player in regional waters. Yet even these giants had a problem. They were still smaller than China's cutters. The China Coast Guard is not a traditional Coast Guard. It is a paramilitary force, integrated into China's broader military strategy. Many Chinese cutters are over 100 meters long, some exceeding 120 meters, armed with heavy cannons, backed by PLA Navy warships just over the horizon. In confrontations, size matters. A larger ship can physically block smaller vessels, withstand ramming, intimidate through presence alone. This is why Chinese cutters routinely shadow, harass, and pressure smaller Southeast Asian vessels. And this is where India enters the picture. According to emerging reports, the Philippine Coast Guard has expressed interest in India's Next generation offshore patrol vessels, or NGOPVs. These ships are being designed and built by Garden Reach Shipbuilders and Engineers, GRSE, one of India's premier state-owned shipyards. Length: over 100 meters. Displacement: around 2,500 tons. Endurance: designed for long-range patrols. Flight deck: helicopter capable. Mission flexibility: patrol, surveillance, command, and support. To put this into perspective, these ships are larger than China's Type 056 corvettes, comparable in size to the Philippine Navy's Jose Rizal-class frigates. If acquired, this would be the first time in history that the Philippine Coast Guard operates vessels of such scale. Now let us be clear, if the Philippine Coast Guard acquires these ships, they will not be armed like Indian Navy warships, and that is by design. Coast Guard missions focus on law enforcement, presence, de-escalation. Maritime safety reports suggest a Philippine configuration would likely include a 30mm remotely controlled cannon, heavy machine guns, non-lethal deterrent systems. But here's the key point. You don't need missiles to dominate gray zone space. What you need is endurance, visibility, command capability, and the ability to stay on station when others must leave. A 100-meter ship provides all of that. In the West Philippine Sea, presence is power. Larger ships can carry more fuel and supplies, deploy helicopters and drones, host command staff, serve as mobile headquarters during crises. They can remain on patrol weeks longer than smaller vessels. And psychologically, they send a message. When a Philippine Coast Guard ship matches or exceeds the size of a Chinese cutter, the narrative changes. No longer is the Philippines visibly outmatched. No longer is intimidation automatic. Of course, nothing comes free. Each NGOPV is estimated to cost P8-10 billion pesos, roughly $150–180 million USD. For comparison, Teresa Magbanua-class vessels cost around $7 billion each. This is expensive, but not unprecedented. India has previously offered soft loan financing and defense-linked development assistance to partner nations. If structured similarly to Japan's ODA, payments could be spread over decades, interest rates kept low, budget shock minimized. One of the most exciting aspects of this proposal is local construction. GRSE has openly stated its willingness to partner with local shipyards, transfer shipbuilding technology, train Filipino engineers and workers. Remember, GRSE once competed in the Philippine Navy's frigate program under Horizon 1. This is not a newcomer. Imagine 100-meter patrol ships built by Filipino hands in Philippine shipyards flying the Coast Guard flag. This would be a historic milestone for the local maritime industry. Under Horizon 3, running until 2032, Philippine defense planning emphasizes maritime domain awareness, joint force integration, persistent presence. While the Coast Guard is separate from the AFP, it is now central to frontline operations. In many West Philippine Sea incidents, the Coast Guard arrives first, absorbs the pressure, buys time for diplomacy and deterrence. Large NGOPVs would act as surveillance hubs, support Navy and Air Force coordination, host drones, helicopters, and sensors. They fit perfectly into Horizon 3's logic. Strategically, this deal would also diversify Philippine partnerships. Today, Japan is the primary Coast Guard supporter. The US provides cutters and training, adding India would expand Manila's diplomatic leverage, strengthen Indo-Pacific alignment, send a signal to Beijing that the Philippines is not isolated. For India, this is equally strategic. Supplying major vessels to the Philippines expands Indian influence in Southeast Asia, counters China's maritime expansion, positions India as a security provider. There are risks. Maintenance costs will be high. Crewing and logistics must scale. Without proper doctrine, ships can become underused. A 100-meter ship is not just a platform, it is a system. It demands training, interagency coordination, long-term sustainment planning. But the risks are manageable. The benefits? Potentially transformative. If this deal moves forward, the Philippine Coast Guard would undergo its most dramatic transformation ever. From a lightly equipped maritime service. 2. A fleet capable of sustained presence, strategic deterrence, and frontline sovereignty defense. In the West Philippine Sea, sovereignty is not defended by statements alone. It is defended by steel, endurance, and the courage to stay when others want you gone. Ladies and gentlemen, the reports surrounding India's next-generation offshore patrol vessels should not be dismissed as rumor. If confirmed, they represent a leap in capability, a diversification of partnerships, and a bold assertion of maritime sovereignty. The question now is simple. Will Manila seize this moment? Because one day, in the contested waters of the West Philippine Sea, the difference between sovereignty and subjugation may rest on the deck of a ship we chose to build, or chose not to. And this is the future unfolding before us. To fully grasp why these ships matter, we must confront a hard truth about modern maritime conflict. Wars today do not begin with missiles. They begin with coast guards. Across the Indo-Pacific, from the East China Sea to the West Philippine Sea, the front lines are no longer gray hulls, but white hulls, vessels painted for law enforcement, but operating with military intent. China understood this earlier than anyone else. By expanding and militarizing its Coast Guard, Beijing created a force that can assert claims without firing shots, apply constant pressure without crossing formal red lines, exhaust smaller nations through presence alone. This is why the China Coast Guard was placed under the Central Military Commission, the same body that controls the PLA. This is not coincidence, it is doctrine, and it means the Philippine Coast Guard is no longer just a civilian agency. Whether Manila likes it or not, the PCG is now a frontline force in a strategic contest. Maritime confrontations, intimidation is not abstract, it is physical. It is measured in freeboard height, hull mass, turning radius, and collision survivability. When two ships meet bow to bow, the larger vessel dictates the encounter. It can cut across the smaller ship's path, force it to maneuver, push it off station, or simply loom immovable. This is why Chinese cutters routinely use shadowing, blocking, close-quarter maneuvering, intentional wake disruption. Against smaller Philippine ships, these tactics work. Against a 100-meter Philippine Coast Guard vessel, the equation changes. Suddenly, ramming becomes risky. Intimidation loses certainty. Escalation becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is exactly what coercive strategies seek to avoid. One of the most underappreciated advantages of large patrol vessels is their ability to function as mobile command centers. A ship of this size can host multi-agency command teams, Navy and Air Force liaison officers, ISR analysts, legal and diplomatic observers. Imagine a scenario at 2nd Thomas Shoal. Instead of rotating smaller vessels in and out, a single large Coast Guard ship could maintain continuous presence, coordinate resupply missions, direct aerial drones, relay live data to Manila and allied partners. This turns the ship into more than a patrol vessel. It becomes sovereignty made visible. Another critical dimension is unmanned systems. Large offshore patrol vessels are ideal platforms for long-endurance UAVs, VTOL drones, surface drones for reconnaissance, autonomous sensor deployment. In the West Philippine Sea, drones allow the Philippines to document harassment in real time, counter disinformation, provide evidence for international legal action. China fears documentation more than confrontation. A large NGOPV operating drones 24/7 would make aggressive maneuvers harder to deny, diplomatic pressure easier to apply, international support more likely. These ships would not just patrol the sea. They would patrol the narrative. The Philippine Coast Guard would not be alone in this evolution. Other nations have already gone down this path. Japan. The Japan Coast Guard operates ships exceeding 150 meters, larger than many destroyers, specifically to counter Chinese pressure around the Senkaku Islands. Vietnam has acquired large offshore patrol vessels to maintain presence without escalating to naval combat. Indonesia's Bakamla is following a similar trajectory, expanding hull size and endurance. The lesson is clear. In disputed waters, Coast Guards win the long game. One of the strongest arguments for large Coast Guard vessels is escalation control. Naval warships signal military intent, trigger stronger Chinese responses, raise the risk of armed confrontation. Coast Guard vessels maintain legality, preserve diplomatic space, allow firmness without provocation. A Philippine Navy frigate confronting a Chinese cutter escalates the situation. A Philippine Coast Guard giant doing the same? That's law enforcement, and in international law, that distinction matters. If the Philippines fields these ships, the message will be unmistakable. To China, we will stay. We will not be pushed aside, and we will do so without firing a shot. To allies, we are serious, we are investing. We are carrying our share of the burden. To the Filipino people, your waters are not abandoned. This is strategic signaling, not through speeches, but through steel. Let us also be honest. These ships would reshape domestic defense politics. They would elevate the Coast Guard's role, demand sustained funding, require long-term planning beyond election cycles. This is where many modernization programs fail, not because of enemy action, but because of inconsistency at home. A ship this large demands commitment for 30 to 40 years, multiple administrations, continuous training and upgrades. The decision to acquire them is not just strategic, it is generational. Now imagine the alternative. The Philippines hesitates. The deal stalls, funding disappears. China continues launching. Larger cutters, more aggressive patrols, more layered coercion. And slowly, quietly, presence becomes absence. Not through war, not through defeat, but through attrition. This is how gray zone conflicts are lost. Every nation has moments where hardware becomes history. For the Philippines, the Jose Rizal-class frigates marked naval rebirth. The FA-50s marked air power revival. A 100-meter Coast Guard ship would mark something else. The moment the Philippines decided, we will not outsource our presence. We will not shrink from our waters, we will endure. In the end, this story is not about India. It is not even about ships. It is about choice, the choice to be present, the choice to endure pressure, the choice to defend sovereignty not with slogans but with sustained action. In the West Philippine Sea, the future will not belong to the loudest voice. It will belong to the ship that stays the longest. And that ship may be the one the Philippines chooses to build next. This is West Pacific Watch, and this is the story unfolding on our horizon.